chief fretter about climate change, I persuaded the collaboration circle, a network of leading community organizations, to consider becoming carbon neutral by 2030 as a community. This was building upon the excellent work of Johan Wiklund, in which PET issued several years of community footprint assessments and witnessed progressive reductions in that footprint through 2019. I have since been chasing grant money to fund our own carbon neutral 2030 initiatives. Over to Gordon and give us some sense about his involvement, particularly with the collaboration circle, of which he is a co-chair.
We created a subcommittee to look at a housing direction statement, and created a document, a plan for what direction housing should go in.
The main areas of, I guess you could say, bang for the carbon buck, where the most emissions reside, and some of the initiatives that have emerged through this work that may form part of the solution to reduce our collective carbon. I just wanted to present where our carbon lies collectively. In Scotland and the UK at large, electricity is not that big a player in this carbon picture. It is a player, of course, 50 tonnes a year. But as you can see, LPG is the winner. We've got a lot of gas heating here, and being a fossil fuel, it's the largest contributor to our collective carbon footprint in the built environment, you could say. And again, going back to say, this doesn't take into account what we buy from Tesco and where we get how far we fly every year and all those things, which is captured in Uran and Roger's work captured. And the other piece of the picture is the transport, so our vehicles. So first things first, I thought we'd talk heat pumps. This is just showing how much energy we get from the respective types of heating, either from LPG or electricity, not from heating, sorry. This is just a broad brush. Despite the fact that LPG is a smaller percentage of the overall, it represents the larger carbon. So that's really what that's presenting. By the count we did with the work, there's around 70 LPG systems in the park. We've currently got around 50 heat pumps. So just a quick one to show people where we're at in terms of operating costs. I think this is for general consumers, this is an important kind of piece of the puzzle. This is the current kind of costing per kilowatt hour that we're seeing now. And it may change quite significantly because gas, I appreciate, is going up quite a lot. There's some initiatives towards holding electricity prices down to incentivize electrification of heat. So this may change again, may have already changed again. But the crux of it is that heat pumps, they're the acronyms on the smaller side of that graph. ASHP is air source heat pump, and GSHP is ground source heat pump. The others are LPG in various forms. Some of you have tanks underground. Some places like Bag End are metered gas from a large cylinder, and others are buying these orange 47 kilo gas bottles to heat properties. So yeah, so it's nice to see that it's can be the cheapest form of heating. So what we did with the study was we looked at we basically tested scenarios, and a side note to that, we really had a strong eye on the electrical infrastructure in the park to know that, well, if we're going to propose 45 new heat pumps, is our electricity grid going to fall down or not? So that's really having the engineers from the university involved helped us to really get a grip of that, which is a really important part of the picture. It's easy to have an ideological stance on getting rid of gas, but it's important to know that practically it can happen. So anyway, we tested, we did a survey. The survey some of you would have participated in helped us see, the general impetus towards heat pumps, which was mixed, I would say, and there wasn't that many. I think we had about 12 properties respond that had gas heating systems, and they generally about 50% said they were considering a heat pump, and the others were maybes and maybe not. So we've tested 3 scenarios: migrating 10 systems to air source heat pump. The second was a community supported approach, which, you know, maybe projects, you know, and shared resources. We looked at 25 heat pumps, the LPG systems migrated to heat pumps, and then we looked at an aggressive approach of 45. And just remembering back to the previous slide, we got about 71 systems. So it's that aggressive approach represents a fair percentage. The challenge is we've got lots of buildings that wouldn't work with heat pumps, and that they're generally the caravans and the bungalows, because they're just too inefficiently insulated that it wouldn't be worth your while doing it. So that's why 180 tons doesn't turn into 0 tons. And the reason 180 tons doesn't turn into a 0 tons is also electricity has some carbon attached to it. So migrating from one to the other still has some form of a footprint. So there's a couple of pictures from the ports, not really saying much other than you look at a nice picture instead of my talking head. There's an example of district heating pipe work on the left there, which we think is an opportunity for getting off gas, sharing, you know, providing communal shared systems to bring the economics of scale down, also to increase the efficiencies. I can talk a little bit more about that when my talking head's back on the screen. And this other picture here is an example of batteries. We tested batteries at a large scale for the project, and it basically it's not economically feasible at this stage. But by being creative with how you use batteries, it could still play a part in this progression towards carbon neutrality. And why I say that is because some parts of our electricity grid are constrained, and by embedding batteries in the grid, there may be a chance to reduce, you know, to avoid putting in new electrical cables in the ground, and also allowing us some capacity to store our collective renewables in our wind and in our solar. So the other thing just to say before I finish, and you can see my face again, is we looked at bio-LPG. So bio-LPG is a little bit questionable in that there's a wide variety of percentages that seem to be mixed in. I think bio-LPG is just any LPG with a percentage of biogas mixed with it, and it's hard. It's fairly unregulated, it looks at this point, and also it's hard to say, you know, where you can hang your hat and what costs, you know, can be attributed to that right now. So some say that, you know, you can get gas with 80% biofuel in it, in which case we could really slash our carbon. The challenge with that, though, is that it's questionable environmentally, the production of gas. Until we have a gas production system that's really relying on something truly sustainable, it's still basically relying on agricultural land being appropriated, and oftentimes chemical agriculture, things of that nature. So just wanting to present that graph because we did ask these questions. Also, hydrogen is in there somewhere, but it seems to be only just starting to sort of bubble into the mainstream now, hydrogen. And also there's efficiencies with hydrogen that we assessed and also are a bit challenging in terms of carbon at this point. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And before I think I put it over to you, Roger, I'll just say that we have been working with a group of interested tidal holders in the field of dreams to assess a communal heating system. And primarily the people who are interested are those that are on gas. They're using gas to heat right now. Some of the Santinis, people in Santinis are interested because they've got a fairly, you could say, inefficient electrical heating system. And just to sow the seed with that, we're basically looking at an opportunity of bringing water from an aquifer that sits 50 meters below us now, to make use of some form of ground source heat pump system. And ground source heating is the Energy Savings Trust's #1 mode of heating that they put forward in terms of this climate crisis, because it's significantly more efficient than air source heat pumps. And we have an aquifer under us now. There's several projects happening in Scotland now where people are bringing water out of aquifers and running them through heat pumps. And essentially there's a system we're looking at that may have be able to cover a large expanse with low losses. So that's a conversation that's afoot at the moment. And yeah, so I'll hand it over to you, Roger, because it's more about what we hear from others rather than me just spieling off. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty. That was very interesting, very clear, very comprehensive. So at this point, it's over to you. I would suggest that we adopt the standard procedure here of putting your hand up in the reactions domain. If you want to say something or ask a question, just raise your hand and I will try to call on you as you do so.
No, I just wanted to ask Patty on this. Fascinating. I wasn't quite clear on this relationship, this energy relationship with the water beneath you. What's going on with the ground heat pump with this water beneath you? I don't see the relationship there. Sure.
Okay, so heat pumps are a little bit of a confusing beast because they're not really, well, they're pumping heat from a relatively warm substance, right? If you're using an air source heat pump, you're pumping heat from sometimes -5-degree air outside. And essentially a heat pump is an air conditioner for those who've ever lived in a warm climate. It's just a reverse cycle air conditioner, or a fridge for that matter, but it's in reverse, the cycles run in reverse. So heat pumps, the efficiency of a heat pump is directly related to the temperature you extract from. So if you're extracting from -5 degrees outside in Scotland in the middle of winter, your efficiency is a number. The higher you can extract, the higher the temperature you can extract, the more efficient the system. And the reason ground source technology is pitched as more well, it is more efficient, is because generally the ground temperature is at minimum around 8 degrees, and aquifer may be a minimum 10 degrees. So, you're extracting heat from 10 degrees as opposed to -5 degrees. Therefore, you're getting substantially higher efficiency. So your electricity equates to more heat out. And heat pumps work on this principle called coefficient of performance, which means for every unit of electricity you put in, you get a number of units of heat out. And that's why they're considered renewable. Then they're renewable for that reason. So for air source heat pump, you put 1 unit of electricity in, you get generally around 2 units of heat out. So you could say it's 200% efficient, but it's extracting the other unit from the air, you could say. With a ground source heat pump, you put 1 unit of electricity in, you usually get 3 out, 3 to 5 out sometimes. So that's the kind of difference there. And
okay, so the relationship is that your water source beneath you is warmer than usually the ground temperature. So you got a better chance or an easier chance of extracting heat from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Good, thank you. I believe it's Christine or Jonathan who wants to speak next.
Yeah, it's me, Roger. Yeah, Paddy, tremendous amount of work there, much appreciation. Yeah, I have read the document there. Ground source heat pump, it's great that's been considered. I know that Michael was looking at that for the barrels and also bag end at one time, and this idea of actually reducing the amount of water that we need to take in, because we have that's metered and paid for as well. So it's not just energy, it's also the advantage or possible advantage of reducing the amount of water that we have to pay for that way. So it'd be great to see that progressed in some way.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for bringing that up, because it's a great forum to talk to that. So yeah, essentially the heat pump we looked at for Bag End required, to make the business case stand up, because it was a smaller number of homes, we looked at offsetting the cost of the potable water coming into the park, which the potable water bill is somewhere in the order of £20,000 a year. So I would love to see that advance. I'm not an expert in water, and I know that there's regulatory wise and public health wise, there's a lot of red tape. So it'd be nice to see where that, that piece, and that's where, it's not, I don't think I have the skill set to progress that, so to speak. So, but that's definitely a part of it. And if we could convince ourselves as the stakeholders and also all the customers in the park that was a good idea, then I think it would be great to see that happen. I can see challenges with that. And it would need to be whatever treatment system you ran, which you would, because it's got some minerals that need to be stripped out, and certain things. Whatever treatment system you ran would need to be run better than some systems that in the past, let me say. So there's some systems within the collective community that over the years have been a little bit let to rack and ruin, and that would need to be ironed out from the get-go, because the regulatory framework around potable water is really stringent. So, but thanks for bringing that.
Okay.
JR, looks like you want to have something. Go ahead.
Question first. Excellent analysis and great graphs. I'm curious, where do you track wood-fired heating and hot water?
Yes, thanks.
Is that included in the analysis?
Yeah, it was in the analysis. So what I did with this report is this report was produced by me, and the technical report was produced by the guys at Strathclyde University, and it's very dense, and I don't think many would be able to access it, to be honest. So, but there was an element. We did look at all the wood, what they call biomass in their kind of analysis, including the foundations district scheme and Solshay, and there's one down on the field as well, and then just the people's wood use of barrel staves or softwood, hardwood. So that was put in the mix, and yeah, at this stage it's basically not given a carbon number other than the transportation costs or the harvesting costs, chainsaws and machines to take that stuff out. But I did realize that Joran said recently that they're looking at bringing in a more realistic number on that carbon into the carbon footprinting process, because we've seen a travesty occur with biomass in the UK, where forests are being cut, and a very highly incentivized deforestation program has been hatched through the RHI scheme, which is seeing, we've got a great, neat little romantic picture where there's some, forestry thinnings are brought over here and wood chipped, and then they're put into our boiler. It's a great picture, but on another scale, during the pandemic, there was 15 lorry loads, and one up and a bit further north than us, 15 lorry loads of just forestry, because they couldn't get the thinnings, and that's so the other thing to say about wood is, yes, plays a part, but there's also the more and more acknowledgement about how dirty it is and how bad it is for respiratory systems and asthma, and actually I had an expert come here and previously to the park, and they were quite opposed to these little hats that we put on top of all our chimneys that stop the rain getting in, because what that actually does is doesn't allow it to get away from our breathing lungs. And he said every chimney he looked at had that here, and he was a bit concerned for us on that level, maybe more for the people who are susceptible to that with their respiratory. So it's in there, the wood picture.
Thank you.
Michael, John, you want to say something as well? Go ahead.
Yeah, just on the sort of how we manage the network, and if we're putting in more renewables and we're putting in more demand because we've got EV charging points and we've got heat pumps. I know the Origin project was about looking at smart grids, about how you manage that, but it seems like heat pumps particularly would be something that could be you could do load shifting so that when there was energy available, they could be switched on automatically. There might be some buffer, water storage that could be put in essentially as a kind of energy store. So, but I wondered if that's been thought about or just included in some of the analysis.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of basically the team at Strathclyde said to me that basically if you did any of the, introducing heat pumps or EV charging, if you did it in a smart way, you're not going to run into too much problem. And how that's delivered, I think, needs some thought. And I think that's where a communal system could be advantageous, because you can engineer that into the collective scheme. The other thing to say is I did some logging for NFT recently of East Winds. East Winds has 26 air source heat pumps, and I was surprised how because of diversity, which means one pump's on, another one's not, and only they're not all on at the same time. The collective peak load is very low, and I found that really interesting. So that's it. Yeah.
Patrick McNamara.
Yes, thanks, Roger. Excellent report, Patty. Really awesome. I'm looking forward to the other two parts today. I have a question on sort of practicalities. What would you recommend as a first phase, and what kind of decision making needs to happen, and how long would a first phase take?
Okay. What I don't know if I can answer that question straight on, but what I hoped would come out of this work was 3 projects. I just sort of had this feeling that it'd be nice to have 3 projects. Interestingly, we've got 3 areas of the mix that are the biggest bang for the carbon buck, we could say. So I feel positive that there's a move. There's a group of interested people in the field of dreams, and that could extend to other places as well around the heating picture. And I think the time seems pretty ripe. What I didn't say about that is I've already spoken to CARES, who's the Community and Renewable Energy Scheme for the Scottish Government, about feasibility work and then capital funding and stuff like that, which is really needed to make it stack up. And also there's a new scheme coming in to incentivise heat pumps. The government's got ambitions of 600,000 a year, so they're about to hatch a new scheme, or about to announce a new scheme, which looks like it'll pick up that capital cost difference that's needed to incentivize these things. So I think the heat pump thing could move, and I think if it's collective, it means it sort of can happen quicker, I would say, because it's a you're pooling resources and attention rather than 50 people having a go at themselves, which could also work. I'm not opposed to that. And the vehicle one, which we're going to present soon, I think is really about, you got to put the horse before the cart in some, figuratively. We don't have that many electric vehicles, so to invest in a charging facility, it's a little bit chicken and egg. So I think there needs to be a bold stand to really say, well, if we put the charging facilities in, then the cars can come, as opposed to waiting for everyone to buy cars and then put in the charge facilities. I would advocate that as an approach. And I think if you could couple that with the smart control that John was just talking about, then there's research money as well that can be leveraged into that. And then the renewables, I think the renewables picture, it plays a part, and I can talk to that in a bit. So and I think we need to be creative with the renewables, and there's a few things we can talk about that are emerging when we get to that part. So in terms of and just to sort of
stop there. Patty, we should maybe stop there and pick this up at the end.
Yeah.
I think we should probably move on, but before we do so, I know that Michael Shaw has some thoughts on this heat pump idea. Do you want to speak, Michael?
On the water, the potable water side, Patty and I had talked to a company in Nairn called Highwater, and they are this sort of leading Scottish company for private water supplies. You know, they do a lot of the big estate works, and they would be a company that could put down the 2 wells and the treatment system. And Barney Walker did a whole thing on the treatment system some years ago. It would be a resin exchange one, and they would be responsible for putting in that system and ensure it was compliant at that point. We'd have to run it, of course. I think the second point to just make, Paddy mentioned research. We've been working with University in Edinburgh, Heriot-Watt University, for some years. We're currently part of a number of grants that they're putting in for the control of heat pumps, basically improving the efficiency of the heat pump itself, and also been able to switch, what Paddy was saying, to reduce the peak load by being able to switch on and off of heat pumps without it necessarily being noticed by the consumer. We're working with a company called Clean Blue Energy, who are in the south, who've got an excellent software package. They would like to, they're ready to do a couple of pilots, 3 pilots, and we're one of the places that would be the very first pilot. It would be a West Winds installation. Just to say that, and as we hopeful by Christmas time, we'll have some grant money coming from Heriot-Watt to do some efficiency work on ground source heat pumps particularly, but also air source between now and the end of the year.
What about
Thank you.
7,000 per household?
Sorry?
7,000.
He's mentioned that.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Michael, before you disappear, I mean, you've given this matter thought for a number of years and done a lot of work investigating it as well. What is your sense about what it would take to make something happen?
Well, I think what Paddy said on this whole question of what they call ambient loop water, in other words, water coming out of the ground and going into individual heat pumps in individual houses. So there would be a loop, let's say in the Field of Dreams, of flow and return between the wells and each house. So you would take in water which would be at a groundwater temperature, and you'd use your own heat pump, which would be a fairly small motor running that, and so you'd have that certain independence there, and it would be linked in a sort of microgrid way with the sort of Clear Blue Energy software to keep it efficient, and if necessary, adjust the peak loads, which would hopefully save us putting in more cables. So I think that would, in my view, that's a great way forward. I know Bernd is interested in doing some pioneering work around that in the Field of Dreams. So if we could get that system going, which I think, Paddy, you thought was a good first effort too, I think it would make a big difference. I think it would be a great way to go.
Thanks, Michael. Just to say on that, so we've got anyone who's in the Field of Dreams or close by there, I guess, bordering it. I'm happy to send a survey and also a bit of a spiel that I did. I recorded a video of myself talking about it.
Excellent.
And so people can get a bit more of a grounding in what we're suggesting. And essentially the first step was to do a pre-feasibility. I give it a couple of days time, do a pre-feasibility on it, and then CARES are waiting for me to make an application for a feasibility study, which is then bigger bucks, and we can ask the professionals like Highwater to do some consulting to us and put a proper project together to work out what's involved.
Okay, so this has huge promise for both cheap and sustainable and carbon-less heating for lots of us. I see you want to say something, Gail, by all means, over to you.
What we heard this morning was in The Guardian is that boilers have to be phased out by, what's it, 2025?
2035.
2035. I don't know if you
That's
said that
boilers, yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
So this is something we're going to need to get on to.
And there are grants for the installation of heat pumps and that type of thing, which would be available. and would be very much part of the financial part of the feasibility study. So I'm really glad to hear, Paddy, you're going for that with CARES.
Yeah, so Amanda's just typed in saying we've got 14 houses interested at the moment. So any others, please chime in. I think the Santini's is a good.
Yeah, the more the better. I mean, as you demonstrated earlier, the more people you can get on a system, the more efficient it's going to be, and the more carbon impact, of course, we will have.
Yeah.
Okay, I do want to move on, but I noticed that both Roy and Liza want to say something. Can you say it reasonably briefly? Liza first.
Reasonably briefly. I'm in a dilemma around the timing of this community heat pump thing and going for an individual one because of the situation with grants. And my boiler is ready to be recycled, say that. So it's a question of timing, but also cost. You know, if there were 40 of us committed to doing the communal thing, it would be one thing. If there was only 3 of us, it would be a whole different thing. And so, Paddy, if you have any thoughts around that, I think it would be really good to put that into the mix.
Yeah, no, good point. There is obviously greater timescales between you capitalising on the current scheme and a communal system being commissioned. The new grant scheme that's coming into place as of April 1st next year is also incentivising heat pumps. So may not be as attractive, but the industry is putting pressure on the government to make it, you know, as attractive as it has been already. So there may be, you know, that maybe takes a little bit of pressure off the thinking that you need to capitalise on this scheme, because this scheme's ending in the end of March 2022.
What scheme? You mean the
RHI, it's called Renewable Heat Incentive. Yeah, so it's ending for domestic. It's already ended for commercial, but it's ending for domestic then end of March next year. And yeah, so I appreciate the pressure. If you know, I'm happy to talk to you more. If it's the actual equipment looks like it's ready to fail, then, you know, there's maybe ways to limp on, you know, to hold, you know, to save your space. But yeah, so I think it's that there's a few things to add to the thinking there for you.
Do you have a sense of how long it would take, like if we all agreed tomorrow, how long it would take for you to apply to CARES and get the whole thing, you know, put in place? Is it a few months or 4 years or?
No, I would have thought, well, the CARES feasibility would probably take it up to the end of March, I guess. And then they've got a capital funding round, I think, in March. And yes, I would have thought, my gut feels 18 months is realistic for that. You know, there's a fair bit of work to be done, and it's a lot of coordination. So,
And do you have a sense of how many people you would need as a start in order to go ahead with it?
Well, that's why I want to do this pre-feasibility look, so I can get a sense. My gut, the only thing I'm going off is my gut feel, which is it'd be nice to see 20.
Right.
If you've got 20, then I think there's a start. It's a start.
Yeah. Great, thank you. That's
and
really
just to say on that, where the wells, I think, having looked at the Field of Dreams, where the most likely or the best place I see for the wells could be where where it borders Ed's fence, near the end turning circle in the Field of Dreams, so near Solshay End, I guess you could say, which would potentially open the scheme up to the barrels and around the corner to Bag End potentially as well, which could really make it a real go off, is the pun. Okay, so basically we asked some questions of people with a survey, and that gave us a bit of information. It was quite, it's interesting to observe in that age of vehicles and also the future, intentions around ownership. And it looked like around a quarter of people were interested to buy an EV in the future sometime. And another large percentage were going to maintain their vehicles until they ran out. But essentially, it showed that there was a collective intention to move to EVs, and I think there was about 28 people that represented. So that's quite a lot of vehicles. I'm showing it as a percentage here, but I think the report, I'd have to look back at it, but it was 20 plus people, which is a lot of vehicles if we had that many. So don't really want to talk to the detail too much. It's in the report. It was interesting to note that, more than 50% of the cars are over 10 years old, but that's probably no surprise. It's hard to own a new vehicle in certain instances. So we tested some scenarios and we looked at the carbon result of that. And we kind of put the bounds on those. One was 20 EVs was the kind of business as usual. 40 EVs was some community support around that, so providing charges, and this is again over a period of time. We envisage this as like a 10-year transition, and then 60 EVs was like aggressive, which is just trying to paint the picture that if you really went at it, where you could get to with that. So you can see that about 170 tonnes reduces to anywhere between 156 down to 115. So so that's, that would be, reducing our carbon by that means. Another thing to say, we looked at the collective charge locations and essentially looked at the current infrastructure electrically and got a sense for where there was easily connectable charge points now with cable infrastructure that's there.
Could you move into full screen so that we could see it here?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I haven't gone there. Yeah. So essentially this is might be shown quite small, but you're all familiar with this map, no doubt. Few locations that came up. One is in the front of East Winds. There's a cable that was provisioned to provide Diamond Wood with electricity, and my understanding is Diamond Wood has been shelved as a development location, in which case there's potentially a cable there with Joondalu's blessing to make use and set up some kind of scalable charging facility for the park entire, maybe. There's another cable at the top of the runway, which maybe makes available some charge points there for the hall goers and that sort of stuff. And then down at the entrance near the holiday park, which is maybe of benefit to the holiday park in being able to provide charging there, but also in and around that area where people are first entering the park. Some other locations that I just put on this map, Field of Dreams car park, maybe Bag End car park, maybe, and Soulshare car park, maybe. So there's that to consider. Little bit of a graph to show the costs, courtesy of Murray Car Share, around what the actual costs of installing these charge points are, and just to show that they aren't, they're not as straightforward maybe as you could expect. The home-based charges are fairly straightforward, I'll say that. And just to take a sidestep from looking at the map and saying that we've already had conversations in a couple of stakeholder groups, including THA and Murray Car Share, and asking this question around, there is a bit of a, some people can charge at home and can park at home and charge from home. Others can't, they don't have car parks available. There's already been some early adopters that have set themselves in a position where they can charge at home, and then that may not be possible for others. So there's a real dilemma in working out how to make it fair, equitable, and that's that kind of knife's edge that THA has always been on, I think, with cars. So that the conversation around cars and charging, I think, is much bigger than what I can lay down. It's real policy-based conversation, I think. And the other thing to say is, as you can see in that graph, the infrastructure costs can be high. Over £10,000, for example. And what the wider Scotland and the wider UK is finding is they need to charge more per kilowatt hour for charging than they do for your home, which means that if you're charging at home, you're getting a cheap rate. But if you're charging a communal charge, you're possibly paying quite a percentage more. And that's another part of that. That's another piece of the dilemma that we've got to grapple with, is that those who've already got in and they're charging home, they may get cheap rates, or we may need to reassess that. But essentially, as you know, it doesn't work out financially to pay £10,000 for a charger and then, you know, make it available to a car here and a car there. You've got to charge a higher rate to make it actually cover costs. Just quickly, another opportunity that came out in the work was this idea of using vehicle to grid technology. So what the industry is moving towards is cars being able to be batteries that can feed back to the grid when they're sitting dormant. This works quite well for private EVs, doesn't work for Murray car sharing anyway, because they're obviously managing you know, a fleet of vehicles and they're needed at all times. But if your car is going to sit there for, you know, 100 hours of the week and be used for the rest, then there's potentially a storage available to the wind turbine generation, solar generation that can be used at a community level. And just to say, going back to the battery conversation, the reason the big batteries didn't work is they're too expensive. But if you've got cars and you can use them as a storage medium, then it can add to the business case for that really quite strongly. So that's where things are headed with cars at a national level and from manufacturers and charge point level. So just want to put that in there. This is just a presentation that you know, to show the cost per 100 miles comparison for the current sort of averages in these types of vehicles. And EVs, as you can see, if you're getting it at domestic electricity rates, it's quite cheap. But that's where, going back to my point, saying that they're now finding they need to charge more for that electricity to make the charge point, to pay off the charge points, because they're expensive. So that comparison may not be real if you start to look at how you charge different tariffs for charging versus making a cup of tea, for example. So yeah, so I'll stop there. There's a lot in that, but I think it's more important to take these comments and feedback than to hear all that again.
Roy, you're first.
Sorry, I don't think I am first, because my point was just about what's in the chat.
Right.
It's not really relevant to what Patty just said.
Thanks. Barrett.
Unmute, Barrett.
You gotta unmute her.
Sorry, guys, newbie on Zoom. So we have a charging point quite close, which is the car share charging point. Would it be efficient to add a charging point to the normal car park there? It's just around the corner. Could that be cost effective? Simply adding some capacity there, and also there's the Moray Art Center car park, which at this moment doesn't have any.
Yeah, good point, Barrett. They're two good locations. You do have a main distribution point electrically in site 70 there. It is probably one of the more constrained areas of the park infrastructure, but with some careful planning and thinking, I think those two sites could be up. You know, you're probably going to need new cables, because the cables that were put in were just to service Gordon's charger and the Twizy charger. So, but it's a close run from there to those locations. So yes, good point.
Yeah, because yeah, obviously, I mean, if we were to go for an electric vehicle, we wouldn't have a charge point. We can't charge at home, but any of the other charge points would be also quite well, relatively far, and maybe also already taken by other people. So just wanted to put that. And the other thing that thinking about electric vehicles, to put into our awareness that actually, if we buy vehicles which have huge batteries, it means, you know, all the environmental impact that vehicle will have is in the production of the batteries, and therefore they need to be used a lot in order for that environmental impact to have a good return. So I'm finding it a really hard kind of balance to make, where you have a car that can drive 500 miles, or I don't know how many miles. And if you never drive that amount of miles, you just have this really snazzy, amazing battery that could serve maybe a small van or a bus that is driving around the countryside constantly and really making a savings. So the more I think about it, it looks like electrical vehicles are really, really perfect for sharing. And we've recently started sharing our car with another community member. And it's an amazing feeling to know that two entities or two households are using this one car. And we don't necessarily, I mean, it's great that we have the car share, don't get me wrong, but the cars which are on the park can also be shared on a private basis. We only had to pay £7 more for insurance, or a bit, yeah. It was £7 more per year for insurance. So we were very surprised how easy that was. And I would certainly want to think along those lines if we ever get an electric vehicle to kind of see if it can get as much use of it as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Barrett. Yeah, no, very good point. And that's a big point in this conversation. So just to say just to give a little bit more background thinking on how that management of, even if you were sharing, and it could even apply to Murray Car Share, is that the smart way of controlling is that we're now starting to see with these pioneering systems is, I need my car by 7 in the morning, and this could apply to Murray Car Share as well. The next booking is 7 a.m. Use the battery capacity as best you can in that period between now and then, but make sure it's full when 7 arrives. So that level of smart control is what we're talking about in terms of this vehicle to grid picture.
But in that case, the vehicle needs to be attached to the grid. The moment, and we will, if let's say we have 60 electric cars in the village, we will not have 60 charge points.
No.
So
that's another good point. So that therein lies the research angle, because working out how you share a resource in that way and make it work and not decentivize people from buying electric vehicles is the challenge. And that's you can't have 60 chargers for 60 cars. It won't work.
So the battery that I have, I would love it to be used within the network in a community setting, but it can't because it can't be connected all the time. So it's so in that sense, more charge points creates more battery power in a sense for the windmills.
Yeah, good point.
So yeah.
Okay, I see that that Dennis has his hand up, but I just want to give Gordon a chance to speak to the whole car question in the light of your obviously considerable experience. What do you think? I mean, how many more charge points? How much demand is there for Murray Car Share, for example? Are you able to keep up with demand?
Well, the number of members at the park has continued to grow. I mean, Paddy's survey kind of showed that there's not a lot more people planning to join Murray Car Share, but we do have a considerable number of members at the park. I'm sorry, I don't have it on me right now. It's probably close to 100. It's probably between 80 and 100.
Well, wow.
So I'm sure it's at least 80. I mean, I didn't have a lot to say at this point, Roger, but if I think on my feet here, I mean, what has just been said, it's using the cars collectively. Murray Car Share, if you're not using a car a lot, it just makes so much more sense environmentally to be part of a club or to be sharing a car with a group of people, like Berend says.
Crucial point, and thanks for making it succinctly.
Yeah, but just the other thing I might want to say is that this is quite a puzzle to work this out, the policy for charge points, and it's just really important because it's coming. The government has legislated there will be no new petrol and diesel cars sold after 2030. So we have to, like the phasing out of fossil fuel boilers, we have to look at this anyway. So let's do it early and have a plan that will work, that we really think about this early and have a strategy for the whole community and have more conversations like this.
Thanks. And Kat, you also have been, I think, chasing up Murray Council, haven't you, Can you say anything about what's happening there?
It's still on hold at the minute, but 2 seconds till I find my paper. Yes, it was just a workshop around the chance of having a council and community shared charge points and the funding and things around that. But at the moment, I haven't heard anything back yet. It will be scheduled when whoever it was off comes back again. Someone ended up off ill.
Is the plan to provide funding for charge points?
It's information about funding. It's
information about
potential funding sources that we can, yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, Dennis, what's your thought?
No, just make some comments here, add something. I want to say beware of new technology that might solve a lot of these problems you're talking about right now. And one of them is these new micro EVs. They're coming along. I just bought one. It's here in France. You can only get it in France here right now. It's called the Citroën Ami. It's a 2-seater. It's about the size of a Fiat 500. And one of the nice things about it is that you don't need a special charger. It's charged directly from your home electrical system. I can drop it out of my, basically I'm going to charge it in a parking lot here from my balcony. So, and it'll be charged in 3 hours. It takes 3 hours to fill the battery, and that will give you about, I don't know, in terms of English system, I think about 50 miles of range, and you can do a maximum of about 30 miles per hour driving it around. It's becoming a big hit here in France. Now, China also got in on this, these micro EVs. They have produced this thing called the Wuling. You can look that up. And that's become fabulously popular in China. And because all of these are very cheap also, for instance, the Citroën Ami would only cost you 5,000 pounds new. And you can charge it right out of your home. And the Wuling is a little bit better, actually. It's got a bigger battery, and it will hold 4 people. You know, you got 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and you have some load space. And that's become extremely popular in China. So that's all I'm saying is that new technology is coming along and will kind of solve some of these problems about where's your nearest charging point. Well, nearest charging point is right at home or someplace else. The other thing I'd like to pick up on, somebody just mentioned about.
You really have to move on.
Okay. About batteries, you know, you want to use them because these batteries have to produce these batteries, these big batteries. It takes so much more carbon. That is a false notion that's been put out and enforced by the fossil fuel companies. It's not true. I mean, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, which I'm a member of, in Boston, made us a direct test of this. And they found that, for instance, like Gordon would know, like you got your Nissan Electric is based on another Nissan model. I forgot the name of it. It's the same thing, but it's gasoline. The difference between the carbon footprint between those two things are only 1 ton of carbon. It takes 6 tons to produce the gasoline model, and it takes 7 tons to produce the electric model. So this idea that you better use that battery because there's so much carbon that's been put into the atmosphere to create it is wrong.
I wasn't talking about carbon. I was talking about lithium.
The same thing.
It's not the same thing. Lithium is a rare earth metal. There's not much of it. Well, so you just have to be very careful with it. That's
I want to come in because we're running out of time, and I really want to get onto the wind solar array question. So if you could, thank you, Dennis. Maybe you could put your points in the chat so we can have it on record. Same with you, Barrett, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, Patty, back to wind versus solar arrays.
Right, yeah. Let me make this full screen now. Okay, so I'll be as quick as possible. It's all good conversation. So again, from the report, essentially what became clear is we've entered the space of becoming a net importer in the park, and with north winds, and I included silver trees because it had electric heating as well. So we're going to move further into being a net importer. The question, I guess, ideologically is, do we want to be return to being a net exporter? In which case, what do we need to do to make that happen? Essentially, we looked at a couple of options. One was a new turbine, a similar size to the ones that are out there, or the same model essentially, and compared that to an amount of solar you could procure for the same cost. So we compared 225 kilowatts of new wind versus 375 kilowatts of solar, and both of which put us back into the net export situation, and also both of which drop our electrical carbon output by about 40 tonnes a year. There's challenges there because of basically the interaction Findhorn Wind Park has with Scottish and Southern electricity and export limits and stuff of that nature. So we also tested how do we not go over our export limit, and what size of solar farm would be applicable for that, that being a 200 kilowatt array, and it would drop carbon by about 4 tonnes a year. The reason it's not such a substantial drop in carbon, it's not a linear relationship. So there's a lot of complex modelling that went on behind the scenes to show that, we would be, even though we're putting in half as much solar, it's not going to drop our carbon by a linear equivalent to the one you saw before. And going back, you see it's dropping from 50 to 11, and this size farm's dropping by 4 tonnes a year. Essentially, we'll still be net importers, but we're working within our export license means to achieve that. The other thing to say, I don't have any more slides on this, but what I think another piece of this puzzle is partnership projects, where maybe smaller arrays that add up to a 200 or a 400 or over time. We're just commissioning one on the affordable housing in North Winds. It's coming up to near 10 kilowatts. There's other ideas emerging around smaller arrays that, maybe 30 kilowatts at a time within the microgrid, on sites which are applicable to that. And then also the idea of people, making use of any grant funding or any impetus to put renewables on their own roof and batteries on their own roof obviously contributes to that as well. So that's a nice quick set of slides, and segue into the conversation around that. Let me stop sharing. So over to you, Roger.
Okay, so once again, open for comments. Actually, maybe at this point, George, would you just like to run your pet idea by us quickly?
Well, my idea is similar. The art of electricity generating by windmill or solar thermal or whatever is to gauge what you require, and don't overproduce, don't underproduce. Slightly overproduce and put it in either batteries or in water storage, and then you can use whatever means you get to gather extra energy. You can store and use it later, and that needs careful consideration. And yeah, the more we diversify the locations, the better it is, as far as I'm concerned. As long as the cable runs there, there's the cable from the windmills into the park, and hook into that wherever we can. That's where I would be coming from.
And your particular project is?
one of my ones at the moment, I'm looking at that car park opposite Centini, make that a big carport. It's only used, that space is only used for car parking. So that is an ideal place as far as I'm concerned. It's close to the wire, close to the cable, a lot of users around it. So it's this balancing which is always the art, you know, the balance is what it is all about.
And I gather one of the primary challenges is finances, how to pay for this thing. And I just wonder whether the wind park, particularly, Mari, you've given some thought to that question, haven't you?
Me, no, I haven't thought about whether the wind.
Mari, I'm talking about on behalf of the wind park.
Yeah, so the wind park is working with its strategy. Just in the last year was the first time we turned a surplus after all the years of paying off all the loans and everything else. The machines are already over 20 years old. The government grant system that we have relied on in renewable obligation certificates, which is less than the FIT tariffs that came in too late for our project, expires in 6 years. We're looking initially at what does it take to maintain, refurbish, and keep them going for as absolutely long as possible. And that could be costly, and that's our first pull on cash. We have looked at various PV arrays, and the wind park does have a home, has quite a lot of PV on the East Wind's houses. And it isn't clear yet. And then, of course, recently there's this price rise happening everywhere. Which will impact us as a wind park. It will also impact us as a community. And we really haven't had enough time to research how to manage that. We believe we have a contract that's stable for the next year, but that company may or may not survive itself. So all of that there's like 3 things that are ahead of us looking at any kind of solar inputs, which is, maintaining what we've got and dealing with this price rise issue, and also giving Alec Walker some slack for a little while because he does most of the number crunching when we do get down to it. So I don't suspect the wind park will come up with anything bright until the next year.
Until the next year being what, in a year's time, or?
Oh, 2022 sometime, spring 2022. Let's keep everything going till spring 2022.
Right.
Yeah, and we looked at the much larger solar array out by the wind turbines, but that would need, I think it's in the report, it's like a 20-year payback, maybe. It needs quite a lot of volunteer money or grant money to make anything like that plausible. And it's also contaminated land, which is a whole other bunch of issues that make it more complicated. So I like the smaller, the carports idea or whatever other open space in smaller doses, I think probably feeds us better.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is it JR or JT who wants to speak up there?
It's JT. I just wondered, Patty, how big a barrier is the export limits that are imposed on us, and what leverage we might have to get those changed so we could increase?
Unfortunately, Duncan's not here, and he's done quite a lot of work on that with the support of AES and Josh. So they're probably best to speak to about that. But last I heard, it was a capex of 25 grand or something like that to make it.
Just 25 at least. Yeah,
at least to. And there was a question about how's that shared, and who are the stakeholders who foot the bill there. So check in with Duncan though, but it's a good question to ask, because a lot of EVs as well, if you're going to do vehicle to grid, they start chewing up that export capacity as well. So it wouldn't take long for us, if we're going to make a good effort of this between EVs and solar and wind, for example, it wouldn't take long to chew up our remaining capacity.
George, are you applauding or asking a question? Want to comment?
A comment with regard to the generation. What has been achieved is that the top limit has been set, which is higher than what is being produced at the moment. So I think there's still about 20% or even more capacity around. So that again would be not all that clever to use it all, but gauge what we are going to produce and put it in batteries so that we don't have to export. Because once you start exporting, you need bigger licenses.
Yeah, so SSC was willing to up it by 25%.
That's right.
Based on a system that Duncan was proposing. So that represented a fair addition to it. And also batteries are counted against that, which makes it a bit hard.
Yeah.
But there's creative thinking been happening for quite a while on that one.
Comments, questions? How do we proceed? Where do we go from here?
We have had a couple of meetings. I know that I was with Gordon twice. We met on Carfront once with Duncan, and then we met again as an informal group before this. So to be able to find a way to make that continue and to link that with DevCom, I think is important.
I remembered my other question, and that is that, Pat has been encouraging us all to, calculate our annual footprints and offset projects, usually in the developing world. If we were to shift, or if we were to make an additional option available in terms of offsetting with your monies going towards local projects, how many of you would be more inclined to offset? Just a quick show of hands. Any of you? Some of you at least. I know Patty's, Jordan is still working on the actual mechanism that might make that possible, but and it certainly wouldn't be as certified as all the other projects, but we're continuing to explore it. Any other questions or suggestions about how where we go from here? I mean, the most obvious thing would be to get in touch with Patty if you're interested in the heat pump idea. I mean, Patty, how would it, I mean, if we implemented that thing, what is your sense about how it would affect heating bills on the park?
Sorry, I've got something open here. Well, essentially your ground source heat pump at current costs would be about 7p a kilowatt hour, but you're going to have to pay for the water coming in because otherwise the scheme can't pay for itself. So yeah, I think it would be in par with, the aim would be it's in par with current gas costs. So it would be, around the 14p a kilowatt hour gas price now would be a good place to try and pitch it. And therefore gas is going to start to go up, and there's talk about keeping electricity down, but I think the recent increase in electricity is just basically market shock. And I think this new program, that the government's trying to announce is trying to take the 90% of heating in this country is from gas. So they're trying to hold electricity down, some prices down, so that electricity heating starts to become more realistic. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I know I'm paying 20 pence a kilowatt hour now, so that would be basically a reduction of about at least a third. Roy, good time for you to come in.
Hi, yeah. Well, I actually just wanted to say a little bit about hydrogen. I've done a little bit of research in hydrogen because I got interested in it. And just to say that it looks unlikely that, although there are quite a few experiments and prototype systems for domestic heating using hydrogen going around, it doesn't look like it's going to be commercially available for at least 3 years. So that's basically what I found at although, and I think Paddy said it's not as efficient as other systems, but it looks like there are some prototype hydrogen systems that look a bit more efficient than the ones he mentioned in his report. So it might, in 3 years' time, things might be different. But yeah, so it depends. Just be the late adopters might be interested in hydrogen, but not the early adopters.
Is there anything from chat that you wanted to bring to our attention? That you've been monitoring that?
Well, there are a few things. Somebody mentioned about let's see, gosh, there's so much chat been going on. I need to get back. About biogas, saying, you know, basically it was actually much better than what Paddy said, but it was a chap who talked on Facebook called Dale Vince from Ecotricity, said he very much supported it. For its 80% pure biogas, but produces a lot of, you know, is actually works on a big scale, could actually works quite well, but I don't know how true that is, whatever.
While you're looking for some more, Gordon, you want to make a comment? Say something? You're not unmuted. You have to unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, it's just to say, I know Mary referred to it, but in my mind, the recent development with the gas prices going up, I mean, probably none of you have felt it yet, but in Murray-Cartier, we have a charge point in Forres, and our electricity prices from bulb have gone up they've more than doubled in the last 6 months, because it's linked to these increasing gas prices. Although it's supposed to be renewable energy, somehow it's linked to gas prices. So for me, in my mind, I may be wrong, but in my mind, this makes it much more attractive to be generating our own electricity at the park, because the outside, the energy coming from the grid, it's going to go, it looks like it's really it's already going up in price hugely. And so to be more independent of that, have our own systems here that are generating electricity, looks like a more viable option, a better option than ever in my eyes.
Yeah, very good point.
So just one thing to say on this entire, and in case, you know, I get hit by a bus or something, there is a lot of modeling that was done which can be adapted to another scenario. For example, if electricity prices are 50% higher, you know, in some ways these models can be adapted to show what that looks like again. So that the suite of stuff handed over to NFD shouldn't be forgotten by us collectively. It may sit in NFD's file set, but there's models there, and anyone with the right technical approach could be picking them up and saying, well, okay, how does this look now, 5 years on? Very sophisticated models were created, and you know they are able to be accessed by those who have a background, a scientific background or a technical background.
There was a specialist in microgas production in the last couple of years that was here and just said that, you know, there's potential with the living machine for that to happen, but you know, I don't know whether there's been any thought about that at all.
Yeah, I did ask that question of the Strathclyde team, and I think they didn't do any detailed numbers on it, but that was a bit like the quantities are insufficient enough to make it not really worth the capex. But I may be wrong. I don't know if they were thinking of it under a different auspice, but that was the general feedback.
Thank you.
I want to create an opportunity for Joran to come in and just tell us what he thinks of this discussion and on what he thinks of the various options we've been discussing in terms of reducing carbon.
Yeah, well, we have been discussing technical solutions today, and they are very important. And I agree with what has been said. But in putting it in perspective, first of all, if we want to become carbon neutral by 2030, which is a plan, and we are applying for money to actually study that, that will mean, without having done any proper calculation, that we need to reduce our total emissions by 7 to 8% per year on a continuous sort of path, and that also means that we will have to include not only technical solutions but also behavioral solutions. Everybody, both on an individual level, must also look at what emissions they cause and reduce that, as well as the business idea of the foundation. which is now based very much on having guests coming in, traveling from abroad, which causes about 67% of all our emissions. And traveling is a major key to reduce our emissions and becoming carbon neutral. So that's something that we, parallel to what we talk about now, need to look into.
Yes. Thanks, Iran. I think I would have loved to have had more time for the behavioural part. So behaviour is a fairly challenging terrain, and I've worked on behaviour change programs for a good 5-6 years now, starting with Origin, and we had a good conference that showed that everyone's grappling with the same challenges with behaviour. So convincing people to change what they currently do is the hardest in the mix here. So, but it's the most, you know, the saying goes, the best kilowatt hour is the one you don't use, and that requires behaviour change to in a lot of cases to make happen. Just to share back to go to when we were working with Origin, there's a lot of people living with high-tech equipment now in their houses, heating controls and yada yada. And what I found, given that a lot of the demographics here haven't really lived with those for very long, that oftentimes it's just on all the time, right? So because I don't know how to use it, I just leave it on. So we were looking at East Winds at the time about having some competition-based program where we all learn how to use it, get to grips with how to nuance it so it's working very efficiently. Like I said, the best kilowatt hour is the one you don't use. So, and create a bit of fun and game around it, who can get the lowest bills and still not freeze and all that sort of bit. So that's one. And the other one that I thought, and I floated with my idea is, I don't know what it's called, Angels, and what's that game that the foundation used to play where you used to deliver presents to people and they wouldn't know who you are? What's that called? Angels and
Immortals.
Yeah. So my thought is, well, maybe you could create a game like that where you sit on their right or left shoulder and say, hey, do you really think you need to fly as much as you do? You know, or you know, like, or create a little bit of a challenge set around, you know, what could you be doing? Because until I'm the same, until someone says to me, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, like I'm not really, I've got millions of other things to focus on. But if having some mentor or angel or whatever you want to call it to hold you accountable, yeah, it could be a fun way to play it through and get some change. But they're the two suggestions that I have.
Well, I note that Simon and Rachel, one of them wants to speak, and I would love to hear from them. So go for it, Simon.
Yeah, I didn't realize that 67% of the, I just want to thank Goran for what he just said. I didn't realize that 2/3 of the community's carbon footprint is transport. That is staggering. And I'm also aware that we've been talking for an hour and a half, and I wonder whether we're doing the same thing as governments do, and that is we don't want to address our behavior. We really love technology, we get excited by it, it's juicy and sexy and new, and yet when do we start to consider what we use? I don't think it's barely been mentioned. You know, we've started off by, this is what we use, how do we change the fuel sources of it? Surely we must always start with, this is what we use, how can we reduce that? And then we'll look at how to produce it. If I design a house, the first thing I do is think about how we save it and use minimally, and then you design the system to what you aspire to use. So please, let's look at behavior and how we could address behavior in the community. We aspire to be communicative with each other as a community. It's primary in the community. So let's communicate the subject matter as best we can in a language that is as simple as possible, so people can understand and engage around what we use.
Thank you, Simon. Patrick, you want to have one last
Actually,
word?
I have a question to Gordon about next steps. So the energy group, what is your next step to take this conversation forward, and what's your next step on the behavioral side?
I don't know if it's me to answer that, but I mean, we just formed, we've had one meeting before this. So our next step is to look at what happened at this meeting and see where we go from there. So that's, Roger, do you have any more to say?
I don't have anything more to say, except to say that it's been a very rich session. And I'm hugely grateful for that alone. I want to thank you all for coming today. I don't know how or where to go exactly, but I certainly would invite anyone who has any brainstorms to get in touch with me directly or to Patty or to whomever. But let's just keep talking about it. I mean, it's interesting because I tried to do a grant with both Michael and Joran, and Joran was totally the behavior and Michael was totally the technical. They're both a piece of the pie and the puzzle. And we got to basically proceed on all fronts, frankly. And with that note, I just want to say thank you again to all concerned and to say goodbye. Thank you very much. Great Sunday slot.
Thank you.